All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Get Weird with me, your host, Brittany Barbieri. This week we're diving into a classic haunting case of 1986. So, without further ado, you know how I like to go. Let's get started. Let's get weird. This particular episode is about the house on Chase Street. For those of you that have followed hauntings in the 80s, 90s, I'm sure some of you are familiar with this case. But for those of you that aren't, buckle up. This is a good one. It had a paper trail, and you know what I feel about paper trails. I like them. So let's get into it. This one is known as the Smurl Haunting of 1986. So I want you to picture this, a modest duplex on Chase Street in a very small town in Pennsylvania. I believe the town was called West Pittston, I think is what it was the name of the town. It was about a working family, a mom and a dad. They had 4 daughters. Grandma and grandpa lived next door in the other duplex. It's the kind of house, honestly, that you would probably drive past hundreds of times on your way to work and never even think twice about it because it just is a basic house. But in 1986, that house had reporters camped around everywhere, every corner of that house outside. It was a famous exorcist couple inside of the house at the time that the reporters were there, and a family who swore a demon was living within their house with them. I'm not making this up. This case was extremely famous, and we're going to break down why. So, you know, how I always like to say, why this one, right? So you say haunted house and immediately everybody starts jumping straight to Amityville, which is fair, which is completely fair, especially when you say famous, haunting, demonic. People are like, Amityville, I've already been here, done this. Nope, that's fair enough to have that thought. Again, fantastic story with a great movie franchise, not going to lie. But this case was from the very same investigators, only just a few years later, that got international headlines and had its moment, and then just as quietly slipped back out of the cultural memory for forever. No franchise, obviously, no anniversary specials, no nothing. Just a family, a simple house, and one of the strangest documented paper trails in American haunting history, if you were to ask me. Now, what case am I talking about? The Smurl Haunting. So I need to kind of build the foundation for you guys so you kind of understand. So Jack and Janet Smurl, they move into this duplex on Chase Street in about the early 1970s. After a flood had damaged their previous home and pushed them basically out. So it's a fixer-upper. They're repainting, they're patching, they're doing all the normal work to make it a home that's livable for them and their family. So Jack's parents decide that they're going to take the other duplex next door so they can live close to the family, which is awesome at that time. That was kind of common. 4 daughters just grew up inside this home. But by every account, this was an ordinary, hardworking, church-going family. Okay, from this period of time. So at first, what happened to them is almost too small to truly notice at first. So some of the instances go that tools go missing. Then they would turn up somewhere that somebody had already looked. Old water stains continue to bleed through fresh paint no matter how many times they put coats on it, which, you know, scientifically we can explain that. It depends on the type of stains, depends on the kind of paint you're using. So, you know, I can understand why at that time, you know, they're kind of like, whatever, you know, and then it starts that all these things start, you know, kind of creeping past annoying, because then like kitchen appliances start catching fire when they're unplugged. A stench I know was reported from like rotten meat filling a room and then vanishing just as fast as it kind of like came into the room. For years, this kind of stayed, as they would say, like a low-grade haunting, the kind of thing that probably a family might just chalk up to just it's an old house. It just needs a lot of repairs. There's probably a dead rodent in the wall somewhere, and we just don't know where it is. I mean, it's Pennsylvania. You know, it could have been a rat, could have been... I lived in the country. Squirrels, rats, mice, they all get into places they shouldn't. Raccoons, they all get into places they shouldn't. And then, you know, one dies. This is going to be quite stinky. So I can understand why they would automatically think that, because I would have. If now in this instance, it wasn't like it was a country home, but that doesn't mean that we don't have rodents and squirrels and stuff like that. I mean, I grew up in Colorado. It happened all the time. So it doesn't matter where you live. They get in the walls. Doesn't matter where. Just so we're clear. So I can understand why they were like pushing this off as not a big deal. But the problem is that this particular stuff decides not to stay low grade forever. Okay, so you can't really chalk it up anymore. It's just an old house and a dead road in the walls. So through the early to mid 80s, the family says the activity gets more and more aggressive and more personal. And I have to kind of break this down a little bit. It's not going to get graphic. I'm not going to get into extreme details, but I will just put some of the details in here for you, because you need to really understand what this family was going through and why it grabbed the attention. They described disembodied voices. They described growling, which also is a common thing within demonic entities in homes. Objects moving on their own, doors opening and closing with no one there. Janet and Jack's mother both separately described hearing voices that sounded exactly like each other, but calling from empty rooms in the house. So Jack says he watched a shadow at one point kind of move up his wife's legs in the dark. So by the family's account, it crossed into a very serious line. Both Jack and Janet describe being physically and sexually violated by an unseen presence in ways that they say left them and their family badly shaken. So I'm going to leave it there. I don't want to dwell on any of the details in that, but I think you needed to be aware of how traumatized this family was and what they were experiencing. And it's an important context for how far the family says that this particular haunting went, and why by January of 1986, they were desperate enough to call in some outside help because they just couldn't deal with it anymore. So that help did come in the form of the famous investigative team, Ed and Lorraine Warren, the same demonologist and medium duo who worked on the Amityville case a decade earlier. Lorraine, who described herself as a clairvoyant, said she did in fact sense multiple entities within their home, including one, what she describes as like a dominant, powerful demon who was kind of running the show inside the building. So the Warrens spent months basically in and out of that home, recording audio, gathering evidence as much as they could collect evidence. And then it stopped being a private family crisis and became a huge headline. So once that story hit the Associated Press in August of 1986, reporters from newspapers and magazines and radio and TV, of course, all like made their way to this tiny little town to cover truly this family's worst nightmare ever live on camera, which, I get at that time, it's unheard of. We're living in a very different culture, a different era of time. And this was really something that people really needed to open their eyes on. And the family, the family goes through not just one, but eventually 4 separate exorcisms with this situation. The first one barely gets going. A priest, I guess, spends about half a week in the house. Activity doesn't show up on cue, as we all know, so he leaves. A second and a third attempt follow not long after, with similar inconclusive results, By 1987, the family has had just enough of their home on Chase Street, like altogether. And they decide that they're going to move out entirely, just pack everything up and just move out. And they're really hoping at this point for a fresh start. And they're hoping that this fresh start solves all their problems in the most traditional way, right? By leaving the house behind and everything that they have been tortured for all this time. So unfortunately for them, it does not. It doesn't stop. So according to the family, weeks into the new house, the same dark, formless mass they had described before showing up again now. And the activity slowly ramps all the way back up. So what do? they go to church one more time, and this time it's official. A fourth and final exorcism is conducted directly by the Catholic Church. What actually happened during it was never actually made public for anyone, but by the family's account, it was the longest, most intense of the four exorcisms they ever had. And after it, the haunting simply ends. No more incidences reported since. Okay. Jack Smurl, unfortunately, passed away. Very recent to our time. He passed away in 2017. Janet and their daughters are still living near West Pittston. And by all accounts, the house has been quiet since that final rite, which to me is fascinating. So I promised you the honest menu. So here it is. On one side, a family who never asked to be famous, who by most accounts stuck to a consistent story for over a decade, across 4 exorcisms and a media circus that clearly just they didn't enjoy. Okay. Local clergy, sorry, it's the morning. Local clergy, including a Catholic priest, and informally actor Jason Miller, who famously played Father Karras in The Exorcist, and happened to be from the area, visited the house and came away believing something genuinely unusual was going on, even if they weren't fully sold on the whole demon bit. On the other side, real documented skepticism, and not just from internet strangers, but investigators and researchers who claimed the case at the time pointed to a few uncomfortable factors. That the Warrens had a financial and media interest in dramatic paranormal cases, that some of the evidence was inconsistent or hard to verify independently, and the family under serious financial and emotional strain, which the Smurls were, at points dealing with real hardship, can produce psychologically real experiences of fear and dread without there being an actual entity living within the walls of that home. Both of those things can be true without canceling each other out. Okay? A family can truly be sincere. Investigators can have their own agenda, and a house can feel genuinely terrifying to the people living within it, whether or not there's something supernatural causing it or not. What makes the case stick with researchers isn't a smoking gun piece of evidence. There truly isn't one. No clean audio recording or photograph that settles this once and for all. It's the sheer duration and consistency over a decade. The same family, escalating symptoms for separate religious interventions, and a final resolution that lines up suspiciously well with the last exorcism. So however you want to explain that timing. Yeah. So that's Chase Street, a family who says they lived with something for over a decade. A house that made international news for one strange summer and then went quiet, both literally and in our collective memory. A story with 4 exorcisms, a demonologist couple with their own complicated reputation, and an ending that either means the church succeeded, where 3 earlier attempts failed, or it means that a genuinely exhausted, traumatized family finally just got the closure they needed one way or another. Now, I'm not going to tell you which one it was. Nobody outside the house or their home really can. But what I can tell you is that the paper trail is very long, and The family never wavered on their story, which to me as a researcher, investigator into any of these kind of claims, especially when there is a paper trail, that is a very important key element to any story. And the house has been quiet for almost 40 years now. Okay? Almost 40 years. So I will leave it with you. A real haunting, real trauma dressed up in demonic language, or something in between that we just don't have good words for yet. I have my own conclusions and my own thoughts, and out of respect for the family, I will just end with this. I have seen things that I cannot explain. I have experienced things I cannot explain. There are darker forces in this world that so many people are truly just not aware of because we have been taught to close our mind off from these things, that they are not real. Most of our history now, almost 40 years later, has been revealed that it was wrong. We were all lied to on many areas because the internet has opened Pandora's box for us to do our own research, to make way to look at documentation and paperwork and the truth that was hidden from us for whatever reason, whatever conspiracy you want to believe or feel very strongly about. The reality is that much of what we were taught and what we were told is wrong, and we're learning that now. And there's kind of a growth happening within people where the veil that had been covering us and blinding us for so many years is being stripped away, and we're learning a lot. And from the work that I work in and the things that I do and the research I do for a living, I have seen enough to stand on the grounds that I believe something real was happening to this family. And I will stand on that. I know some people are going to be like, oh, is that the hill you want to die on, Brittany? I mean, think about that. But until you have witnessed or seen things that I have, or have tested scientific theories in the way that I have, and understanding quantum physics and the universe and the way that time works like I have, to really go deep and understand how this works and how it makes sense and why this is possible, it's kind of hard for people not to believe that, especially if you've been taught to be closed off to it and these things are not real. It's very hard to rewire your brain, and that is very understandably so. But I encourage you, please take a minute, think about it, open your eyes up. There is dark forces, dark energy everywhere. There is positive energy and good forces everywhere, and they constantly battle each other, even in visions that we cannot see. If things could slow down between dimensions and speed, perhaps we would see more than what we do. And maybe that is the key. Maybe some areas, some people, maybe their energy, unfortunately, attracts those things. Frequency is something that we are still learning about, something that we are still trying to grasp and understand and harness. And until we have a full understanding of the spiritual world, of frequencies, dimensions, and all of the above, we cannot say for certain that this did not happen to these people, because we do not actually know. And there are skeptics out there that will say, yes, we do, but we really don't. We really don't. And I will beg you not to be so arrogant on that, because that will be your downfall one day, unfortunately, when we get too arrogant and feel like we know everything. Because in truth, we are still students in this world, and every day we learn that yesterday we were wrong. So with that, my friends, this is another episode of Get Weird, and I encourage you to stay curious, stay open-minded, question everything, absorb as much knowledge as you can, and at the end of the day, stay weird.